everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week, so if you think that's something that you might want to stick around for, then definitely subscribe, and also make sure that your little notification bell is switched on so that YouTube will notify you every single time that I post. But anyway, this week we are going to be talking about the case of Melanie Hall, and this case is actually quite close to home for me, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to cover it. This case took place in June of 1996 in Bath, which is a city in Somerset in England, and as a lot of you can often tell from my accent, I am also from around that area. I'm from the West Country. So this is Melanie Hall. She was a 25-year-old woman born on the 20th of August 1970 to her parents named Steve and Patricia, and she also had a sister named Dominique. And the Hall family lived in Bradford-on-Avon, which is just over 5 miles from Bath, and I believe at the time of this case taking place, Melanie still lived with her parents in Bradford-on-Avon. However, she worked in Bath. She was a psychology student who graduated from the University of Bath in 1995, so just a year before this case. After getting her degree in psychology, Melanie started a job working as a clerical officer in Bath's Royal United Hospital. And Melanie's parents, Steve and Patricia, were so proud of her when she graduated, and they said that graduating had been a dream of Melanie's for years. And obviously after she graduated, she got a really good job working for the NHS, and it was while she was working in the hospital that she met a man named Philip Carlbaum, I'm really sorry, I'm not sure how his last name is pronounced. But he was a newly qualified doctor at the hospital, and eventually the two, Melanie and Philip, began dating. But I believe they only started dating a couple of weeks before Melanie suddenly vanished. It was Saturday the 8th of June 1996, and that day Melanie decided that she was going to go and stay at her boyfriend Philip's flat in Bath. So Melanie's mother Patricia drove her to Philip's home later that day, and after that she never saw her daughter again. Now on this particular day, the 8th of June 1996, England were playing football against Switzerland at Wembley Stadium in the FIFA European Championship. So everyone was really excited and they wanted to celebrate the occasion. In the end, the teams drew 1-1, and a lot of people decided to head to town and head to the pubs and clubs to party. And so did Philip and Melanie. They decided to go to a party that a friend of theirs was hosting that evening. This party ended earlier than expected, but Philip and Melanie still wanted to stay out and have a few drinks, and so they decided to go to Cadillac's nightclub, which was in the Bohemian quarter of Bath. It was a very popular nightclub in the area. Melanie and Philip arrived at the nightclub with another couple, and they had a few drinks together. However, after a while, this other couple decided to just leave the club, but Philip and Melanie wanted to stay a bit longer. So they stayed and they carried on drinking, and at some point Philip left his girlfriend briefly in the club because he needed some more money. So he went to get some more money, and when he got back he saw Melanie dancing with another guy in the nightclub, and this made Philip feel really jealous and angry, and so he just stormed off and he decided to leave the club again. According to one source, Philip and Melanie argued before he left about the fact that she was dancing with another man, but eventually Philip did leave. I presume he just went home and he left his girlfriend in the club on her own. 25-year-old Melanie Hall was last seen at 1:10 a.m, so the early hours of the morning on the 9th of June. She was seen sitting on a stool in the club alone, and after this sighting, she was never seen alive again. She just vanished. No one saw or heard from Melanie again after that night. She didn't return to her home in Bradford-on-Avon. She didn't return to Philip's flat. He said the last time he saw her was in the nightclub. No one had any idea what happened to her or where she had gone. Everyone was immediately concerned, as this seemed just so out of character for Melanie. She hadn't been in contact with anyone at all to let them know where she was, and their concerns only grew when Melanie didn't show up for work at the hospital on the following Monday morning. And it was at this point that her parents, Steve and Patricia, just knew that something had to be wrong, and so they decided to contact the police and report their daughter as missing. The Avon and Somerset police immediately launched an investigation to try and find the 25-year-old, and this case gained a lot of public interest. A couple of days after Melanie vanished, her parents launched a campaign to try and locate her, and they also did an appeal where they were begging for their daughter to be returned to them safely. Her parents were certain that Melanie had not gone missing by choice. Like, she hadn't chosen to, you know, run away or start a new life or anything like that, because she had no reason to want to do that. They were certain that something must have happened to her, that foul play must have been involved in her disappearance. The police released a computer-enhanced image of Melanie to the public to show what she had been wearing on the night that she went missing. That night, Melanie was wearing a light blue silk dress with black suede shoes. She also had a cream-coloured single-breasted jacket and a black satchel bag, and inside this bag she had her bank card and a checkbook. Melanie's case was also featured on an episode of Crime Watch. They showed a reconstruction of her last known movements from that night, and they also offered a $10,000 reward for anyone with information regarding her whereabouts. 60 police officers were assigned to help with this inquiry, and in the weeks following Melanie's disappearance, the police interviewed over 1,000 people and took countless witness statements, mainly from other people who were out clubbing in the area that night and also from local taxi drivers. They also received several calls from members of the public with possible tips and leads, but ultimately nothing really proved to be very significant or useful. It seemed like no one had witnessed what happened to Melanie. It was like she had just vanished into thin air from a busy nightclub. The River Avon was also being searched, as it was feared that maybe Melanie had fallen into the water that night. You know, she had been drinking alcohol that night, and it's possible that in a drunken state she could have fallen and drowned in the river. So divers were sent to search the River Avon, but there was nothing, no sign of Melanie Hall. Now, I know I'm going to get questions about Melanie's boyfriend, Philip. Where did he go after he left the club that night? Could he have had something to do with Melanie's disappearance, since he was pretty angry at her when he left? If you remember, he saw her dancing with another man, and he left the nightclub because he was jealous and annoyed. To be honest, I really couldn't find much information at all about what Philip did after leaving Cadillac's nightclub, but I'm guessing he must have had a pretty solid alibi, because he was questioned by detectives, but they didn't think that he had anything to do with his girlfriend's case. He was not a person of interest. I also read on one source that at one point they did a forensic search of Philip's car and they didn't find anything concerning, so there was nothing at all linking him to Melanie's disappearance. Also, according to one source, the police did receive some information which seemed to be credible from two separate families that both lived either on or I think very close to Walcott Street, which was the same road that the Cadillac's nightclub was on. Anyway, these two families apparently both came forward to the police and said that on the night that Melanie vanished, they heard a woman shouting, "Leave me alone, let me go." So this seemed like a promising lead. It seemed likely this woman shouting, "Leave me alone, let me go," could have been Melanie, and that maybe she was attacked that night. And this lead was investigated, but ultimately, just like with other leads, nothing really came of it. This case seemed like it was just going to go cold because soon weeks turned into months and months turned into years, and still Melanie's family had no answers as to what happened to her that night in June of 1996. And it was just crazy to everyone that a young woman could just vanish from a busy nightclub. You know, this was a Saturday night. A lot of people were out partying and drinking, and yet no one saw anything. No one even knew if Melanie was dead or alive. Numerous men were arrested and questioned over the years regarding the disappearance of Melanie Hall, including one man who actually handed himself into the police. He literally confessed to being involved in Melanie's case. However, he had a psychiatric evaluation and it was clear that he had mental health issues, and he was just saying it was him when it wasn't. And in the end, all the other men who were arrested and questioned were released without charge. There was never any evidence connecting them to the case. Melanie's family did multiple appeals over the years, hoping that someone would come forward with the information needed to crack the case. But again, nothing significant really came from these appeals as far as I could tell. And I think by this point, Melanie's family believed that she was dead. I don't think they held out much hope that she was still alive and out there somewhere. I think that they thought that she was dead, but they just wanted to know where she was, where her remains were. On the 17th of November 2004, Melanie Hall was declared legally dead despite her remains having never been found. But by this time, it had been over 8 years since her disappearance, and people just thought that she had to be deceased. They really didn't think that she was still alive. And so the search for a body continued over the years, and finally, in the year 2009, there was a breakthrough in the case. On the 5th of October 2009, a workman was clearing like rubbish and undergrowth from the side of a verge next to the slip road at junction 14 on the M5 motorway. He was near Thornbury in South Gloucestershire, which was just under 30 miles from Bath, where Melanie had disappeared from. Anyway, he was clearing this rubbish and debris and stuff when he came across a black plastic bag. So he started pulling at this bag to try and bring it closer to him, and when he did, a couple of bones fell out of it. So the police were obviously called to the scene, and I believe about 5 black bags were found around the field next to the motorway, all of which contained bones, which were soon confirmed to be human. They were human bones. It was quickly determined that these bones had come from a woman, and the remains found were of a skull, pelvis, arms and legs, and also found alongside these remains was a gold ring. So it was theorised at this point that the remains could have been that of missing Melanie Hall, who had disappeared 13 years earlier. And so the police went to visit Steve and Patricia, Melanie's parents, and they confirmed that the gold ring found alongside these remains was their daughter's ring. She had been wearing it the night that she vanished. It was actually a wedding ring that Melanie's great-grandmother had given to her. I imagine it was probably quite a unique ring, and so Steve and Patricia just knew that the remains had to be their daughter. But still, the police couldn't concretely say that it was until it was confirmed by DNA, and so the body was taken for a post-mortem, and soon dental records confirmed that these were in fact the skeletal remains of 25-year-old Melanie Hall. After all these years, they finally had her body. But what exactly had happened to her, and why were her remains discovered by the side of a motorway? Why had they just been ditched and dumped like rubbish? The post-mortem concluded that Melanie had sustained a fractured skull as a result of blunt force trauma to the head, so her cause of death was likely from head injuries. Her cheekbone and jaw was also fractured, and blue polypropylene rope had been used to tie the black bags containing her remains together. I also read on one source that this blue rope had been used to tie Melanie up, so I'm guessing some of this rope was like around her hands. The clothes that Melanie had been wearing on the night that she vanished were not found with her remains, so someone had taken her clothes off of her body, suggesting that there was maybe a sexual element to this murder. A couple of weeks after the remains were found, on the 29th of October, the police announced to the public that they had also discovered a set of keys belonging to a Ford vehicle near Melanie's remains, and they suggested that maybe these keys could be linked to Melanie's case. Maybe these keys belonged to the person who ditched Melanie's body. Now, to be honest, there isn't much more information online about these car keys, but according to one source, in 2013, the police had received information about a Volkswagen Golf car that they believed could have been significant in this case. They were looking for more information about this specific VW car with this specific number plate, and the picture of the car is on screen now. I think they wanted to know who the previous owner of the car was, because maybe they thought that whoever it was could have been responsible for Melanie's death. But I think eventually this VW car lead was ruled out as having anything to do with the case. I'm sorry that was all a bit confusing, but I don't really know any more information about this car and why the police thought that it was relevant to the case in the first place. But I don't believe they think that it's relevant now, like relevant to the case now. But I still wanted to include the information in this video just in case it is. But anyway, in the year 2016, so 20 years after Melanie disappeared and 7 years after her remains were found, her case was once again featured on an episode of Crime Watch. And this time the detectives announced to the public that they now had a substantial piece of evidence in this case. They actually had some DNA evidence. They had found traces of DNA on an item that was found at the scene where Melanie's remains were discovered, and it was later announced that this item with DNA on was the blue rope that had been used to tie the black bin bags containing her remains together. And it's very possible that this DNA is from Melanie's killer. I've got a direct quote here from Detective Chief Inspector James Ricco of the Avon and Somerset Police, and he said, quote, "Today we're confirming the DNA traces were found on a length of blue polypropylene rope which was wrapped around thin black bin liners which had contained her body. We recovered a 13-metre length of 4mm rope from the scene, made up from 4 separate lengths knotted together. In addition to the 3 knots joining the ropes, there were 4 other knots on the ropes, a total of 7 knots. It is commercially manufactured rope and commonly used on building sites and for drawing electrical cable through trunking." He also described the DNA as being, quote, "in its embryonic stages." So I don't believe the traces are strong enough to be entered into the DNA database yet. However, hopefully, as forensic technology continues to progress and improve, they will soon be able to develop these DNA traces, and they may lead to the identity of the murderer. I believe the detectives are still working with forensics to develop these DNA traces today, so I will obviously keep you updated should anything more come from this lead. The charity Crime Stoppers have reinstated a $10,000 reward for anyone with information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible for Melanie's death. And on top of that, her parents, Steve and Patricia, are offering £50,000 for the conviction of their daughter's murderer. They are, of course, desperate to know who did this to Melanie and why. There have been a couple of theories surrounding who the killer might have been over the years, the first being an attacker known as the Batman Rapist. The man who became known as the Batman Rapist has never been identified, but he committed a number of sexual assaults in the 1990s in the area of Bath. He was given the name the Batman Rapist because after one attack, he left behind his baseball cap. and it had a Batman logo on it. The assailant would threaten the female victims with a knife as they were returning to their cars. So I think he would like watch women in the area walk back to their parked cars, and if they were alone and no one else was around, he would see his opportunity to strike and he would approach them and threaten them. He would force his victims into their own cars whilst he got into the passenger seat, and he would make them drive to a quiet, secluded area in the south of Bath where he would rape them. And it's believed that he may have had a fetish for women's tights because he would enjoy ripping his victims' tights off of their legs during the sexual assault. And apparently when one of his victims wasn't wearing tights, he made her put on a pair that he had brought with him just so he could rip them off during the attack. And then after a lot of the attacks, he would make the victim drive back to where he abducted them from, and then he would just leave. The Batman Rapist is believed to have committed 17 sexual assaults in the Bath area, and according to a couple of sources, just a few hours before Melanie Hall vanished on the 9th of June 1996, the attacker tried to carjack a woman in the Bath area at knife point, but this attempt was unsuccessful. So maybe he was so frustrated that he had failed, and so he decided to attack again later that night, and he attacked Melanie Hall. As far as we know, he never killed anyone. He never killed any of his victims. He would rape them and then let them go. But maybe if he was Melanie's attacker, she just put up such a fight against this man that he got annoyed and angry and he decided to kill her. Like I said, the Batman Rapist has never been identified to this day, and he's also never been successfully linked to the murder of Melanie Hall. However, I don't believe detectives have ever completely ruled out the possibility that he could be the killer. Some people also theorised that Melanie's case could be linked to the case of Susie Lamplow. She was an estate agent who went missing in 1986, and she has never been found, but she is now presumed dead. Although Susie's body has never been found, most people believe that she was murdered by a man named John Cannon. He committed a number of sexual assaults, and he was also convicted of the murder of another woman named Shirley Banks, and it was suggested that maybe he was involved in the murder of Melanie Hall. However, it was soon determined that he was actually already in prison at the time that Melanie disappeared, so he's obviously been ruled out now. Another name mentioned in connection with Melanie's case was Christopher Halliwell. He was responsible for the murders of two women, Sian O'Callaghan and Becky Godden Edwards, and there were a couple of similarities between their murders and the murder of Melanie Hall. For example, all three women sustained head injuries, and all three women were last seen in nightclubs. Although sources online say that the Avon and Somerset police have pretty much ruled out Christopher Halliwell as having anything to do with Melanie's case, they don't believe that he was the one responsible for her death. To date, around 11 men have been arrested in connection with Melanie's case, but they were all released without charge. The police didn't believe that they were involved, or at least they didn't have enough evidence to charge them. And today it has been over 24 years since Melanie was killed, and her family are still searching for answers. This case is still open today, and it does seem like the police are getting closer and closer to identifying Melanie's killer. As far as I'm aware, they are still working on the DNA found on the blue rope, and they are still appealing to anyone with any information regarding Melanie's death to come forward. As always with my unsolved cases, I will leave some information in the description box in case anyone watching this now knows anything about the murder of Melanie Hall. And that is pretty much it for this case. As usual, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Once again, I just want to give a special shout out to the members of my Patreon page. Thank you so much for your support, guys. If anyone else wants to become a member of our little Patreon family, then the link is always in the description box of my videos. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie. Bye guys!